folks. Welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlson Shawn, the Sunday night version. As we, Carlos is yawning over here. I'm trying not to yawn. It's not that our jobs are boring or that this game is boring, Carlos, but the Lions lose their home opener 37-31 in overtime to Seattle Seahawks. Another, how many of that? I don't even know how many of that is in a row for the Lions losing to Seattle, but it seems like three. Okay, it seems like forever.
Well, 300 Campbell under Dan Campbell.
Yeah, 300 Dan Campbell. So it's a tough loss. It was a great game in a lot of ways, but 65,000, however many fans walked out of here, kind of 66. Sorry, walked out of here stunned. What? Just your initial thoughts on what we saw here today?
Yeah, thanks for letting me have the microphone for just a little bit, Shawn. It was a good game. It was exciting. It was a fun home opener. People turned out. It was loud for the most part, exciting. But, the Seahawks just, they played a better game than the Lions as far as limiting their mistakes. The Lions weren't able to take advantage of them losing their two starting offensive tackles. They should have gotten to Geno Smith more often. But the Seahawks they made the playoffs last year, thanks to the Lions partly, but they're a good team. They're not a great team, but this is a pretty good test for the Lions as far as understanding where they are. The Seahawks have a decent defense. They've got a good offense. They've got some weapons. They've got a good run game. They've got a smart veteran quarterback, not a superstar. But this is the kind of team that the Lions are going to have to beat. And especially when you have everything going your way at home, the defense, and the defensive players talked about it in the locker room afterward. It was kind of a little bit of a waste to have the crowd behind them so much. A couple of false starts on the first drive for the Seahawks. So disappointing, but they clean things up. And this is what Dan Campbell said. After they clean up a few things, they don't turn over the ball like they did on offense, and things look a lot more promising. So not the start you want, but not a total cave-in, destroy everything. I think you wrote that all hope is not lost. So it's not that bad, right? The sky isn't falling.
No, it's not. It's not falling. Look, there are a few things. One is it felt a little familiar, and I know that can cause some PTSD, right? First of all, because it's Seattle.
Don't say those three words. Don't say them.
And I didn't, and I wrote that in my column, just as you wrote. You've never heard it louder, right?
I've heard it louder.
In fact, I encourage to readers. That was my lead of my column. Like, don't say it, because I don't want to say it. I don't want to bring Beetlejuice out here and start getting other kind of cursy curses going on. But look. A few things. One about the defense, and they did struggle. There were definitely times they could have put more pressure on Geno Smith, and they did not. Dan Campbell said after the game, look, they weren't necessarily trying. I mean, obviously they wanted to put pressure on him, but they had a larger plan to contain him, and he was just as frustrated, if not more so, with the lack of containment because they were taking loose angles, not sharp enough angles, or not slowing, getting to the point of attack kind of, and not being in balance or just not spinning the wrong way. We saw Aiden Hutchinson do that a couple times at Kansas City, but it was interesting. He said that, look, you play your gaps, you rush the right way, somebody else who can come and make the play. That's actually what we saw in the last offensive possession of regulation for Seattle, when they did a really good job at containing Smith. He was dancing around a little bit, and he's really good in the pocket and sliding around. Before Anzalone finally sees him kind of tuck the ball, leaves his man, and says, hey, I'm going to see if I can get to him before he can, throw it again. So it was that play was great because it set up the Lions. What did you think at that point when the Lions got the ball near midfield with a minute and a half or whatever it was left, roughly? And I want to say all three timeouts. Did you think we were about to witness, the second straight kind of win, last minute win?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought that they were gonna, Khalif Raymond starts it off with a nice, I think, 17-yard punt return, and everything seems to be going their way. They don't have to go very far. This seemed like it was going to be set up for a dramatic, end of the game win for the Lions, or close to it. So it was a little bit surprising. I mean, they opted, I think it was 4th and 3, and they opted to kick a field goal to tie it. Interesting choice by Dan Campbell. Figuring his defense is going to have to make a stop either way, probably. So maybe do it in overtime rather than do it in regulation. it makes sense. I don't have too much of a problem with that. But yeah, it seemed like we were gonna. I thought they were gonna win at the end. I thought that with the momentum kind of going their way, and Geno Smith, I thought that's one of those turning moments when Smith should have just burned the ball, and instead he takes a 17-yard sack near his own end zone, which is stupid. I don't understand why he did that. That would have given him another 15 yards on the punt or something if he'd burned the ball 10 yards at least somewhere. That would have made a big difference. It would have backed up the Lions. So yeah, they needed to do more on both sides of the ball, but they did enough to win. And if you limit the mistakes, I mean, it was oddly the offense that cost them. And Campbell said, we're not good enough to do this. And I don't think a lot of teams are. You can't have two big turnovers, a pick six and a fumble deep in your own territory that leads to a touchdown. You really can't do that, especially against this kind of a team. This is the perfect kind of team that you're gonna meet them in the playoffs. You're gonna see this kind of a team in the playoffs, and you can't afford those mistakes. But a cliche, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, is what he said, and he's right. The beginning of the year, people start working out the kinks, still dealing with some things, some injuries, and whatever it might be. But they need to learn from this, and they're going to play the Atlanta Falcons coming in next week. They're 2-0. They're looking pretty good. That's going to be another test for them. Campbell wouldn't go so far as to say this, and he said it's a little bit of humble pie for us, which is good. And I don't think he will come out and say it because he doesn't want to stop the excitement from fans. But I think some of the teams, some of the players are feeling themselves, and they're getting excited, and the ski masks and all this, that's buying into the hype. And I think you need to kind of be checked a little bit. Sometimes it's not going to be that. You can beat the Chiefs in Kansas City, doesn't mean you're going to roll through the NFL. And I think it's a surprise for them to have lost at home, but it's a wake-up call, and it's coming early. So hopefully not an expensive lesson for them. So all in all, and you could sense it didn't you sense it from Campbell? He wasn't crying. He wasn't pounding the desk. You could feel like, well, maybe this isn't the worst thing to happen to us.
No, for sure. Look, Dan Campbell doesn't say things for no reason, right? When he says humble pie, it's a cliche. And, hey, as I'm working on my second column, and I think your second column is done, by the way, because you're just a better writer and more efficient. But as I'm working on my second column, I'm like, hey, cliches are cliches because there's truth in them, right? I mean, sure. we use them for a reason, and humble pie is obviously a cliche. But I think he's trying to get at a larger point. And it's not to suggest, I think there's some nuance here. It's not to suggest that the players weren't focused during the week in the prep or in the films and breaking down film and the game plan and going through the reps in practice. Of course they're focused. I mean, they're professionals, but there are levels to this, sometimes subtle levels to this in terms of it's not that you're daydreaming when, whenever your position coach is talking about some assignment, But I know what he means. Sometimes you feel that in your life, right? You start feeling maybe a little bit too good about something, and you're not paying attention to something over here. It's not because you're not focused. Your head's not on the same swivel it is normally. And I think the Lions got a little bit of that today. I think there's part of the folks who are out there saying, "Well, what about the pass rush?" Look, we talked about that a minute ago. I think that will come. They were missing a couple of guys today. Josh Pascal, who I think is coming on, is a really good interior, push the pocket kind of a guy. And I think we saw that against Kansas City because to me they got to Mahomes a little bit more consistently than I got to Geno Smith. Now, having said that, Pete Carroll's whole plan, their staff's whole plan, was to get the ball out really quick and mostly outside the numbers, mostly toward the sideline. And most of those throws and his completions were out. Sometimes they got the tight end up the seams, but for the most part, he was either dropping back and letting it go quickly or running to one side or the other and then throwing on the run, and he was accurate as hell. And but that was part of the plan, right? They didn't want to have a normal pocket back there because they knew Detroit would probably start getting to that. And that was a really great plan on Seattle's part. And Geno Smith was really accurate, and they got, as you said, good weapons. So, tip your cap in that way. As far as offense, you mentioned the turnovers. To me, I'm curious what you think. The margin for error is not – this is the thing, man. We had a summer of hype, more than a summer, right? And then they beat Kansas City. And it's funny. I had somebody text me after the game. I'm not going to say who. said, after this is a while after the game, said, after thinking about it and calming down and relaxing a little bit, I'm just going to be excited if they get to the playoffs. I need to rethink my expectations. And I think a lot of people are probably feeling that. You're coming in today thinking, could they get to a Super Bowl? I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I think there's some of that out there.
I'm sorry, I was daydreaming about my next column. What were you saying? I don't remember what you were talking about.
That's okay. About your next column.
Yeah, no, that you know what, that's absolutely true. And I think part of it is there is something behind who wants it more sometimes a little bit that gives you a little bit. You could see the Seahawks came in here charged up. I mean, before the game. After the game, they totally trolled the Lions. We have a story up on Freep.com, and they were celebrating with a ski mask in the locker room. As I walked past it, they were doing that. Would you hear on the video the chant? They were singing and jumping around. But even before the game, they met as a team at the 50-yard line. Were jumping up and down. Even after a touchback, they'd run into the end zone and troll the line, point at the Lions fans and get them up. And there was a different energy about them. And I'm not saying the Lions didn't have energy, but I think it's also, I remember, I've heard this from defensive players over the years, and they say, the coaches always tell them for the defense, on road games, you got to bring your own energy with you because the fans aren't going to give it to you. And the Seahawks almost seemed to embrace that. They embodied that, and they had a lot of their own energy. And sometimes that you can take that. The whole, ironically, the C.J. Gardner-Johnson thing, like kind of let's play the villain and whatever, quoting Brad Holmes. The Seahawks were here to spoil their home opener, and that's part of it. That can give you juice. So they played a really good game. They had a good game plan. It's Geno Smith for crying out loud, but he played an excellent game. And DJ Metcalf is a really good receiver. He made the catches that Kadarius Toney couldn't dream of making in Kansas City. And that was the difference for them. But they aren't that far off. So I don't think it's a worrisome thing for the Lions. And they always say this, and it's going back to cliches, right? But they always say the first game or two of the NFL, someone's going to look really bad that's actually going to make the playoffs. Someone's going to look great who's going to totally, implode and not make the playoffs. So it's early, but it's a learning point, an inflection point maybe for them. But I think it's promising still. And maybe they're not going to make the Super Bowl. Maybe they will. Maybe we'll look back at this point and say, hey, remember that home opener? They learned something about themselves.
Yeah, I just think, again, it's about expectation. The key is not to think about the last 60 years, but the last half of last year and then last week in Kansas City. Put what happened here at Ford Field in that context. And then I think you can be a little bit more objective about what they can do because they get a lot of good players. They're not a great team, but they have the pieces to be, I think, a pretty good team. And I think that's what we saw today. Seattle's a pretty good team, too. You can't have drops. They had a couple of key drops. You got to run the right routes. You got to be in sync. That's stuff that they can fix. But, look, it's I know it was disappointing. Not for you, of course, because as you said, you're impartial.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
I just care about my Marriott points and my Delta miles. That's all I'm doing.
Delta's apparently, from what I hear, Delta's taking they're redoing their whole system. But that's
they're taking away our Sky Club.
Yeah, that's neither here nor there. All right, look, we're gonna try to do this version of our podcast as much as we can on Sundays. We'll hope to have Dave Burkett join us from time to time. That's going to depend on some deadlines and so forth, but. It's good to do this in person with an actual microphone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice to see you. You look sharp, by the way.
Thank you.
And a really nice shirt. You got some nice chinos on, or should I say khakis?
They're khakis.
They're khakis.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, my man. Until we'll talk later in the week when we do our normal regular podcast. We can break this down a little bit more, and we'll see what else is happening. But until then, all right, my man. We'll talk to you soon.